Welcome to Leaving Nothing to Chance, your go-to podcast where we bring you insights from some of the most influential voices in small business and personal development. Each week, we dive deep into conversations with top thought leaders, authors, and business moguls from around the world, sharing their secrets to success and strategies for growth. Tune in for exclusive content that will inspire, motivate, and equip you to take your journey to the next level. This is Leaving Nothing to Chance.
Well, hey, folks, part two of The Only Witness with our friend Guy Powell. And Guy, this is just such a interesting, fun, compelling subject, as you and I have discussed before, and great job on this. So let's kind of pick it up. So let's pick it up in France. When do you think that it finally got to France before its final kind of resting spot that it lives in today?
Yeah, the exact time that it got to France is unfortunately not known at the moment. Certainly in the 14th century, it was documented to have been in Lille, France, which is just outside of Paris, a little bit, as I recall, a little bit north and east of Paris. And it's a tiny little town, and the original church that the Shroud was in at that time has been destroyed, and then now there's another church there on the property, but it's not the original church. And it's kind of funny because I would love to go see that church and just to see what happened there, but that original church, that Lille, France church, is not there. And that was roughly in the 1350s, as I recall. And it was called a collegiate church. And what a collegiate church means is that they have a different reporting structure. So most of the Catholic churches they have a parish, the priest reports into a bishop, the bishop reports into an archbishop, and so there's a hierarchy there. A collegiate church doesn't report in that way. And so then the other churches in the area, they were a little bit upset that this church then had a special reporting structure. And as I recall, it reports into the archbishop directly and into the kind of the elite, so to speak, in Paris directly, as opposed to going through the local bishop and what have you. And so the Shroud shows up there. And that's kind of what's interesting is that there's no real history of where the Shroud was before that. Now, in the meantime, since I've written the book, there are a lot of hints as to it being here or as to it being there. But in terms of actually being a written, documented, with multiple writings saying, yes, the Shroud was here at that time, that doesn't exist. But it does exist then for it's one of the exhibitions that was going on in France. And one of the things that was going on was that the Lille Church started to exhibit in these events called ostensions, kind of like from the word ostentation, so to exhibit. And they started exhibiting it, and people would come to the church as pilgrims to want to see this Shroud. And that ended up taking money away from some of the other churches. And so it's believed that some of the other churches got upset and they said, hey, that's a fake over there. That's not the real Shroud. We have the real Shroud. And so then there was a lot of arguments about whether that was the Shroud or not. And it's pretty well certain that the Shroud that we know today was in Lille at that time and was exhibited to pilgrims to come and want to see it. So now it's in France. Then the ownership of it is, at least from some folks, is pretty certain this way. Some others maybe not so much. And the family of Savoy, one of the dukes of Savoy, ended up helping out the owner of the Shroud, what was believed at the time to be the owner of the Shroud. She had some money troubles, and she was excommunicated because she was not treating that Lille church just right, and there's a whole story in there about that. And so she needed some money, and so the Duke of Savoy actually purchased the Shroud, gave her money, gave her rents off of a couple of different castles so that she could survive and what have you. So now the family of Savoy has the Shroud. And the Savoys are now known as being from northern Italy. But northern Italy at that time was actually part of France. And so now the Savoy family has it, the Duke of Savoy, so a relatively high royal ranking person. And he's getting a little bit worried because the King of France is sitting over there saying, I like that area, that Savoy area over there. Let me figure out a way for me to take it over. And so the Duke of Savoy says, well, hold on a second, and I don't want to do that. And so he actually then decides to bring it down to Italy, what's now known as modern day Italy, and brings it to Turin, and it's been in Turin ever since. And so then he owned it during that time, and he owned it for about 400 or 500 years up until the Second World War. And I'll leave that off for a minute, but basically he owned it, for about 500 years after he purchased it from the original owner that had it in Liray, France.
Oh, it's amazing too. I mean, having been to the little church, it's not a huge church, by the way, folks. If you haven't been there, it's kind of off the beaten path, to be honest with you. When you're in Turin, it's not like hey, everybody's going there. It's. I only found it because I was looking for it for one thing, and also I love Egyptology. There's a great Egyptian museum about 2 blocks from there that is actually after the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It's actually the second largest collection, I was told anyway, of Egyptian artifacts in the world.
Hmm.
So there's that whole little area there, just fascinating. And but anyway, that's we can talk about that another time. But I guess one of the questions goes through my mind, with obviously the Vatican being in Rome, why is it not in Rome where the Pope and the seat of the Catholic Church obviously is? Why how has it stayed in Turin all these years?
Yeah, well, that's because of this family, the Savoy family. So the Savoy family moved their capital from Chambéry, France, because of their fear of the French Empire, and moved it down to Turin and made the capital of the Savoy area and the Savoy family Turin, and what is now known as modern day, Turin, Italy. And then it was it was in Turin, and well, still is in Turin, and then it stayed with the Savoy family for hundreds of years, and then Italy unified, so all of the different principalities and whatever they're called at the time became unified into what's now known as Italy. And actually the Savoy family became one of the king's lineages of the kings of Italy. And so now he had it in Turin. He was certainly very religious and certainly wanted to maintain his family, but didn't necessarily want to give it to the Roman Catholic Church. Now he did do that. King Umberto II in 1983, when he passed away, in his will, he bequeathed the shroud to the Pope and gave it to the Pope personally. And so based on that bequeath, the Roman Catholic Church now has possession of it, and they decided to leave it in Turin, and that's just where it's been, and I guess that's where it'll stay forever. Didn't necessarily need to be brought to Rome, so to speak, even though the Roman Catholic Church now owns it through the Pope.
And of course, there's been controversy with this through the years, like there is anything like this from the ancient, world, and of course, the significance of it to those of us that are Christian. On top of it, there was a meeting in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and interestingly enough, it seemed like some non-believers became believers after they did some testing on it. But pick that story up if you can, Guy, because this is historical. I mean, this you to make this this isn't fiction. I mean, this is some real stuff. Talk about that a little bit and some of those folks' revelations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things. One thing nowadays, and whenever you have two people in the room talking about the shroud, you have three or four or five different opinions on it. It's interesting. I'm on the board of an organization called STERA, the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association, and one another group that we work pretty closely with. It's called Athonia, and one of the things that's kind of what people are trying to do is, well, what are the things that are not controversial about the shroud, or rather, what are the things that are controversial and what are the things that are not controversial? And unfortunately, because there are so many different opinions and because there are so many different measurements and things like that that have been done, that there is a lot of controversy surrounding the shroud, whether it's true or the true and authentic burial cloth of Jesus, whether it dates back to the first century, and how did the image get made? Was it painted? Was it dyed? Was it scorched? What is it that caused that image on that cloth? And so there's a whole bunch of different scientific studies that have been going on about it, and the story that we're talking about here goes all the way back to the 1970s, and which is from Shroud's perspective, incredibly recent. And one of the challenges is that the church that manages the shroud today doesn't necessarily want to allow a lot of scientific testing on it. So in 1978, when it was still owned by the King of Italy, King Umberto II, he said, okay, well, I'm going to allow American scientists 5 full days, 120 hours to do all kinds of non-destructive tests. That's critical. Non-destructive tests on the shroud. Well, that group was originally part of some of the Los Alamos scientists. So Dr. John Jackson and Eric Jumper and a couple of other ones, they were some of the Los Alamos rocket scientists and nuclear weapons scientists, I guess. Smart, intelligent, knew how to study things. And so they were coming out of Albuquerque. So Los Alamos is just, up the mountain, so to speak, from Albuquerque. And so in the mid 70s or so, this idea started to germinate. Well, let's approach the Shroud of Turin and the authorities that are in charge of it, and let's do some testing on it. And so in 1978, that took place. Now, unfortunately, after that, there was some testing that was done, some radiocarbon testing, and then that's really where probably the biggest controversy came in, because the radiocarbon testing took place, and it was poorly done, poorly administered, poorly scientifically done, statistically done incorrectly. You name it, everything went wrong. And of course, they didn't come out with a first century dating of the shroud. They came out with a 13th to 14th century of the shroud, and of course that that wreaked havoc in the shroud world. So, and that's kind of where a lot of the controversy comes from the shroud today.
Well, it's such an amazing story. There's so many twists and turns, but just the fact that it's still there, it still exists, and that we can go see it. I mean, and my suggestion to anybody, I know you have the same one, and this is so close to your heart and one of your passions in life, but go see it, folks. Go take the trip. Beautiful part of Italy for one thing, and you see it. So, what's this organization you're with? Go back to that for a minute. So,
Sure.
obviously that's something dedicated to the shroud, but is there ongoing research, or what's the goal of that organization in terms of the shroud?
Sure. So the original 1978 research was done under a group called the STURP, STURP, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, and that was then originally founded by John Jackson, and there were, I can't remember the exact count, 20 or 30 different scientists that were involved in it, specifying exactly what kind of tests and how it's going to be tested during that 120 hour time period that they had access to it. They had an official documentarian or documenting photographer. His name was Barry Schwartz, a Jew, and he was, proud Jew and proud of it. And he says, we're going to just fly over there. I'm going to get a free ticket over to Turin. I'm going to fly over there. We're going to figure out that this is just fake. It's painted or whatever. And we're going to have 5 days in Turin, eat some good food, drink some good wine, and go home. And of course, they spent the 120 hours, and they realized at the end of that time that they could not determine what caused that image. It was not a scorch, it was not a dye, it was not a paint, it was not all this litany of different things that they were able to prove that it was not. So they were not able to determine what caused that image. Now, Barry Schwartz, though, is definitely one of the important people. So a lot of those folks that were part of the STIRP scientist team, they went off and started their own studies and continued writing papers and continued to study the available data and the available photographs that they had and use that to develop new theories as to how the image took place or what happened, and really some great work. Now, Barry Schwartz, he was the one that owned all of the photography. He founded a group called STERA, the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association. And really, it was to be a repository of all of his archival material, of all of his photographs that he had. He had a couple of threads, actual threads that were taken from the shroud. He had, I don't know, hundreds of these little sticky tape samplings that were taken. And he then made them and subsumed them into this group called STERA. And now Barry just died, last year in June. And then the organization is now operating without him. The board then decided to expand, and I was honored to be asked to be on the board, and I'm on the board now of that group and trying to help manage all of these archives and artifacts and everything that he has. Now, I mentioned these sticky tapes. One of the tests that they did was to take a piece of sticky tape and stick it on the cloth and then pull it off. And when you pull it off, it pulls off little pieces of pollen, little pieces of dirt. And depending upon where you put it on the shroud, you could get different things. So you could put it on his feet, on the area of his feet, and you'll find that there's a lot of dirt down there and a certain kind of stone that you would expect from the dust that's in Jerusalem. There was a sticky tape sample of his nose, of the tip of his nose, and that same dust that's on his feet is on the tip of his nose. And then what that means, for example, is that he probably fell, and he fell face first because he had his hands, when he was walking down the Via Dolorosa, he had his hands tied to the cross, and he fell, and he couldn't protect hhis nose, and then bang, there he is breaking probably damaging his nose and then getting the dust on the tips of his nose. So those are some of the things, and that's then what STERA is doing. We try to promote education and research and awareness of the shroud. In parallel with that, I'm on another board, and we are promoting right now a conference on the shroud coming up in July 31st through August 3rd. That'll be in St. Louis. And that organization is called SEEC, SEEC. So that's the Shroud of Turin Educational Endeavors Corporation. And our goal is to, bring the shroud to life, to provide a place where people can present some papers and other scientific research that's been done over the last, couple of years, and then hopefully bring the knowledge and awareness and education on the shroud a little bit further.
And just since we talked last, we got a new pope, and he happens to be an American. So, think that's going to help, hurt, or irrelevant?
Well, we're hoping. Our hope is that now with Pope Francis, he did not want to have any testing done on the shroud. So while he was Pope, and I don't know how long it was, 20 years, so there was basically, there was no access to the shroud. So we're now hoping that the new Pope Leo the 14th, he'll actually want to have and allow access to the shroud for scientific testing, hopefully non-destructive testing, so that we can then test out some theories as to what caused the image, why was the radiocarbon dating incorrect, what went wrong there, was it what are the reasons, was it contamination, was it new material and repairs, was it something else that caused the dating to be wrong?
That's two questions, Guy. I know you got another meeting. When you started this project, I know you're a man of faith. Obviously, we've had a discussion before, but has it made you stronger in your faith doing all of this analysis, historical, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny because when you're writing it, then you realize how important faith is not only my faith, but the faith of the people that were surrounding the shroud in each one of these little stories. And that kind of then influenced my faith, certainly, and made it stronger. And one of the objectives of my book for me was I wanted to bring just one person to Christ. And as you can imagine, that's not an easy thing. I can't see myself being what's called the bullhorn guy standing on the corner saying, Jesus Christ, repent now, Jesus Christ is here and he lives. So I'm not a bullhorn guy. But, so my goal has been to bring one person to Christ, and I think I've achieved that manifold. So one of the ministries that I've been involved in since the Shroud has been to teach the Shroud to a group of pastors that I'm involved in based out of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And so I've done 2 sessions now, or maybe it's 3 sessions. Yeah, 3 sessions. And so the people that are on the other line when I'm doing the training are pastors and priests that want to use the Shroud to teach to their flocks, and they're the people there to bring them to Christ. And they want to use the Shroud as one way to evangelize. And so my assumption then is that has been successful and that will be successful. So hopefully, I'll be bringing people to Christ through that quite a bit. In the meantime, I've been promoting the Shroud. I've been on, numerous podcasts. I've been with Nancy Grace a couple of times. I've met one of the princes of the Savoy family and got to know him and had some, great conversations with him. And so it's led me to things that you'd never expect. You'd absolutely never expect. And I'm just riding the wave, and God is leading me along that wave.
And the last question, of course, folks, is just a reminder where to get the book.
Absolutely. You can go to guypowell.com and you'll be able to order it there. Or, of course, it's available online at any of the popular stores, certainly on Amazon, and then on Barnes & Noble and some of the other digital online sources.
It's been a privilege, my friend, and continued good health, good writing, and appreciate what you're doing. This is, by the way, folks, this is a great gift item for people in your family, whether they're believers or non-believers. If they want to read it from a historical standpoint, there's one way to read it. Want to read it from a faith standpoint, there's another way to read it. But at the end of the day, it's just good reading on top of what the subject happens to be. So thank you for your commitment to sharing this with the world, my friend.
Thank you, John. I so much appreciate it. And as I mentioned, go to guypowell.com and you can find out more about me and about the book, and then hopefully be able to order it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check back weekly for more exciting episodes. And don't miss Ink and Insight every Wednesday, where we celebrate iconic authors and dive into their impactful works.